You're listening to Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins. Glad to have you with us. The website, tonyperkins.com. All right, we started off the program talking about the Stick It to the People Act. That's H.R. 1. That's the left's effort to usurp the historic role of the states in setting guidelines for elections and take the nation, I believe, into uncharted constitutional territory, which, by the way, never ends well. Joining me now to talk about the dangers of this bill is U.S. Senate Republican Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. Leader, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tony, glad to be with you.
Let's talk first about the dangers of this bill, H.R. 1, and why you're dead set to stop it.
This, Tony, is the worst bill I've observed in my time in the Senate, in the sense that it directly targets speech and associations, and also seeks to construct a system nationwide that benefits the left in every election. They haven't held back at all. This is dramatic federalization of the way we do elections. It starts taking the Federal Election Commission, which has been dead even 3-3 for half a century, and turning it into a majoritarian body, 3-2, which means if you have a Democratic administration, they'll be able to go after Republicans with impunity for any real or even imaginary violations. It also, particularly with regard to organizations that are 501c4s, which is probably what you are, they repeal protections that block the IRS from targeting nonprofits for political purposes. So
for having this conversation right now. They don't want us to have this conversation.
You got it. And then let's look at how they're trying to jerry-rig the elections. Right now, the way we conduct elections are determined consistent with the Founding Fathers and the Constitution at the state level. This federalizes virtually every aspect of how we conduct elections in this country. For example, it requires no excuse absentee ballots, something that some states did this year because of the pandemic, but was never thought of as a permanent solution. A few states do it, but most don't. It undermines photo ID at the polls, any effort to verify that the person voting is who they say they are. It requires what we call ballot harvesting. That is the ability to go around and collect a whole bunch of ballots and turn them in for somebody else, fraught with the potential for fraud. California, for example, allows that now. No other states do. It also mandates that anyone can register, just show up at the polls on election day and register. Not even a requirement that you prove who you are. How does it affect the House of Representatives? State legislative authority over the redistricting is removed nationwide to so-called independent commissions, and if people don't like independent commissions, they can file lawsuits that could end up in the district court of the Washington, D.C.
By the way, Leader McConnell, on those independent commissions, there's actually a religious test. They want to know if you have religious affiliations before you could serve on one of those commissions, which last time I read the Constitution is a violation.
Well, I hope, Tony, we don't have to test this in court. I hope we can kill it right here in the Senate, which brings me to the importance of keeping the legislative filibuster. Under the current process in the Senate, it would require 60 votes, not just 51, to do this. The bad news is it seems to be a litmus test for Democrats. Every single Democrat in the House voted for it, except two who voted with us, and every single Republican voted against it. This is a blatant attempt by the Democratic Party to take over American elections in perpetuity. And there are two Democrats, at least so far, who've said they'll not allow the legislative filibuster to be eliminated. Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, both of whom ought to be encouraged to stay where they are because they'll come under intense pressure. A couple of other features of this bill that you may or may not have talked about with your listeners. It requires automatic registration for convicted felons, regardless of the crime that they committed, and actually requires pre-registration of 16-year-olds, and a majority of Democrats in the House actually voted to lower the voting age to 16. So this is an opportunity for the Democrats to seize power in perpetuity, and they don't want to miss that chance. And it's going to come down to whether or not we can defeat it in the Senate and whether or not Manchin and Sinema don't allow this to be decided with simply 51 votes, but rather require 60.
How committed are the Democrats to getting this through the process?
Well, you put yourself in their shoes. If you think you've greatly enhanced the chances of success in every election into the distant future, you're going to do everything you can to pull this off. So my assumption is that Manchin and Sinema are going to be under enormous pressure to eliminate the legislative filibuster, to try to pass this with 50 votes with Vice President Harris in the chair. So I would say to anybody who's listening to your program, any reinforcement you can give to Manchin and Sinema would be extremely helpful.
So I know, Leader, you've got to go, but so the action item here is for those living in West Virginia. We have listeners in West Virginia. We have listeners in Arizona, to make sure that Senator Manchin and Sinema are on. They stick to their guns and they stay true to their commitment of protecting that legislative filibuster. What else can our listeners do to be helpful?
That's the key to success.
All right. Well, Leader McConnell, I want to thank you for joining us, and I know you know the process better than any, and I want to go back to what you said at the very beginning, and I hope people didn't miss this. In your time in the U.S. Senate, you've never seen anything like this piece of legislation before.
I haven't. It's a blatant takeover of American politics by the left.
All right. Senator Mitch McConnell, thanks so much for joining us.